Hi all, good evening. My name is Shruchita Prasad and I am Senior Lead Engineer with JP Morgan Chase. I would like to start the session with a question. How many of you over here are using coding agents? Whatever could be your vendor, are you using coding agents? Okay. So today, this session is about how do you basically make sure that when you go ahead and do switches from one coding agent to the other, your coding standards, your guidelines, they remain the same. So that is what we are going to talk about today. And also, when you go ahead and integrate static tool analysis tools like check styles, spot bugs, or arc units, what impact do they have on the code which is generated by coding agents? So quickly moving on, I'll first discuss about the problem which we are trying to solve, and then we will move on to context engineering, because Agents.md is a very small part of the whole context with coding agents view. And then I'll take few examples of the static tools which I have used over here for our sample use case. And then we'll talk about the whole kind of a workflow which we are trying to build over here, that the static tool analysis gives you result, we feed into the agent, and how it improvises your coding, and then we'll follow up with a live demonstration, and then we'll summarize our session. Moving on. So when we talk about agent consistency, or when we talk about agent churn, right? So I'll just give an example of, suppose I'm using GitHub Copilot and I'm using, for example, Windsurf or Codium. So these coding agents, essentially have something called an instruction files. So what are instruction files? So our journey definitely started with prompting, right? Everybody's initial journey was, figuring out how to prompt or use the correct words to get a better result. The journey progressed, and what we observed that for every prompt, we cannot keep on repeating the same list of instruction if it applies to every prompt. So that's where the coding agents came with something called an instruction file, which basically is a place where you can go ahead and define your rules, which would work across your chat and sessions. It will live in the coding agent's memory. So now going back to our example of GitHub Copilot and Codium. So in GitHub Copilot, you have Copilot instructions.md. Windsurf has its own rules.md. Claude has its own Claude.md, right? Now I am experimenting, I am shifting from one agent to other. It is a task for me as a developer to always maintain these MD files, have to be in sync, and it's a task, right? The rules, the standards, they do not change based on the repository. And that's the first problem. The second problem is, fine, I go ahead and take one of my coding agents. I define my rules. I can only hope that the coding agent goes ahead and generates the code as per the guidelines which I have given. But in enterprise applications or in real production applications, we would always go ahead and test it and feel more confident about it. So that's the second part of the problem, where we take the static tool analysis, which is not a new concept. We have been using it for developer written code as well. And that's where the second part of the problem is solved, that we go ahead after the agent generated code is done, we go ahead and verify these using the static tool analysis as the guardrails. So in short, what we have is a shift left approach, where your instructions file act as an early feedback to your agent, so that the code which it gets, which the coding agent generates, is as per your standards, But even LLM or your coding agents, they give you a warning that it can go ahead and do mistakes. That's where our static analysis tools come into play. They go ahead and verify. Moving on. So what is the solution which we are proposing? Whatever is your coding agent, there is something called Agents.md file. I'll go deeper into it, what exactly it is. But in short, somewhere mid-2025 last year, OpenAI, Google, and other coding vendors, they agreed upon a shared standard. So we as developers don't have to switch on various rule files. And Agents.md is an open standard, and by December 2025, now it has been added to Linux Foundation, which is also taking care of MCP. So essentially, irrespective of your agents, you define your instruction rules standards in Agents.md, and that will take care, or that will be the single source of truth for your agent to generate the code. Moving on. Now, we have been hearing a term called context engineering a lot, but in layman terms, it essentially is what can the coding agent view in your code, okay? So whatever it is able to see, whatever context you are able to pass to it, that essentially is context engineering. So if I want to give a real world example, while LLM is a knowledgeable senior software engineer, very knowledgeable one, when you go ahead and somebody joins your new team, you obviously make them aware about the standards, the practices which your team follows. So that's where, this context engineering comes into picture, that what should I show to my LLM so that it generates the code as per my team's standard. Moving on. So here I would talk about what all is a context window, or what exactly AI sees it. So on the top layer is your system prompt. Mostly system prompt is set up by the vendor. For example, GitHub Copilot could just write that you are an expert, coding assistant, these are your boundaries. This is something which normally you are not allowed to change. It is something set up by the vendor, okay? Now comes the next layer of custom instructions, which we talked about. And that's where your Agents.md, your vendor-specific instructions files lie. And that's where you define your standards, your whatever guardrails and other things which you would like to do, that's in the instruction file. One thing which we should always keep in mind is, if you are chatting with your coding agent, the whole conversation you're inputting, it is giving a response, and then you keep on going, your conversation goes on. So that whole conversation history also goes in this context window. So it is very essential. There are cases where you must have observed, when you keep on chatting with the agent, everything was going very good through the beginning, and somewhere in between, it went haywire, right? So the whole conversation history also keeps on adding. I know coding agents, they summarize it and do it, but at times so there is a defined limit to this context window. So that's where these are the major elements. Now, implicit context. Today, I'll be focusing more on the IDE part of I know there are CLIs as well through which you can do coding agents. But right now, the session's focus is on, using the coding agents using integrated development environment. So what is implicit context? Anything which is open in your IDE, even if you have not mentioned it, if the file is open, it also goes in as an implicit context, though you have not specified explicitly, but it still goes in the context window. Now, explicit references. You have explicitly given the name of that, go ahead on this file, refer this file. So you are explicitly referencing it. And then last, tool outputs. Now, as we all know that LLM, the model itself is trained on a historical data. But we would like the LLM to do n number of things, maybe fetch something from the file, search, or go to the internet, fetch something. So these tools, you can say, are more like external powers given to the LLM by the coding agent, that if you want to go ahead and grab something from the web, search something, it's not present in the LLM model, then these tools also can give you an interface to externally fetch something. So these are the major layers for your context window. So throughout whatever the journey which we have so far, what we should always understand is what you can control is the prompt, the instructions. You can influence them, but LLM is essentially a non-deterministic, gives a non-deterministic output, right? So you can always influence them, and then you can verify through guardrails. So that is a practice which will give you a lot of confidence. Moving on. Now coming to our main file which we are talking about, Agents.md. You can think of this as the README for agents. Okay, so any coding agent, how we developers use README file. This Agents.md is an open markdown based format. It works with AI coding agents. A lot of agents support it. That you can visit this link and you can see the ecosystem, a lot of agents which support it. And there is nothing called mandatory in this Agents.md. It depends on you what you want to define. And we will quickly go to the structure or what all you can go ahead and define it. So maybe you can give a project overview, build and test commands, code quality, style, architecture, security considerations, right? And you can add more stuff to it. End of the day, it's an open format. Whatever you specify, it will be taken by the coding agent. Now, one thing we talked about, limited context window. So generally, it is a good practice that you should not dump everything in a single agents.md file. Okay, so how exactly does it work is, you can place one agents.md at the parent folder location, the root location. And then at module level, you can have another agents.md. And if you are having a layered architecture, in the demo, I'll show that the example will be a Spring Boot application where my service layer has its own agents.md, controller has its own agents.md. So the recommendation is at the parent level, keep rules which apply to every layer. For example, logging, right? It's a cross-layer practice which you would like to recommend across the layers. So agents.md is the correct place to have it. And then your API specific rules would lie on the controller level, service, DAO, to their respective agents.md layer. So how this helps is, it doesn't load up your context window. It only loads where or which layer are you going to do a change on. So that is something essentially to keep in mind. One thing which I would also like to call out is, every coding agent gives you the flexibility of go ahead and get an agents.md, auto-generated. There was a paper which was, I think, 1 or 2 months back, published, that if you go ahead and use agents.md, it actually gives you bad results. But how are you crafting your agents.md? It is very essential, don't overburden your agents.md with instructions which by default the coding agent knows or other layers are taking care. So agents.md should be very specific, like writing @rest controller is something which coding agent already knows, right? So do things or write things which, there are 2-3 ways to do it. So go ahead and, just define your standard. We'll go ahead, I can quickly show. So here, if you see, we have on the left hand side, if you see, on this is my parents.agents.md file, and I can expand it. So this has got some project overview, some build commands, definition of doneness, logging, as already told, this applies across the layer, some coding rules, which obviously applies across the layers. RQNet, I'll talk about it later on, security performance. But I think the main thing which I wanted to show is, the hierarchical structure. The agents.md is here, then repository. So you can have your layer specific rules in your agents.md file. That's how the coding agent will go ahead and load it. Moving on. Now, when I have already, defined my rules, my standards on agents.md, why should I take a pain of then integrating a static analysis tool to my code? So, agents.md, if you have given yes, coding agent will go ahead and generate the code as per your standards, but there is no guarantee. It's a probability that 80 to 90% it will go ahead and generate to it, but you would definitely need those guardrails, tests, and checks to make sure that, whatever you expect from the coding agent, the actual code also follows that. And that's where these static analysis tools, they come handy, because they ensure that once your code generated by the coding agent or by the developer, it goes ahead and verifies this. So I'll start with this workflow, which this which we have to feed in the agents.md file. What essentially it does is, you have your coding agent, and then you have integrated these static tool analysis. Here are a few examples. You may go ahead and choose any of these static tools which work for you. Check style, Spotbug, RQNet. And once, you go ahead and, do your build. If there are any violations, that is fed back to the coding agent. It goes ahead, fixes it, regenerates the code. So the idea is pretty simple. These static tool analysis, they act as a feedback loop to your agents. Now I'll go on to each, static tool analysis, what I have tried to show over here, and why, we should use one of them. So as a team, normally we go ahead and agree on, this should be my method naming, this should be my service naming, and defining a standard and readable code will not only help developers, it will eventually help coding agents as well. So that's where this check style comes handy, where you can go ahead and define your naming conventions, your indentation, brace placement, So this would all will be taken care by the check style. You can integrate it in the CI/CD pipeline with the build, so that the whole idea is to shift left. Now people might question that a lot of organizations have Sonar also integrated in their CI/CD, right? Why to take that pain of check style and then XYZ? So Sonar needs an external server. And here what these tools are doing essentially is, they give an early feedback. You do not need an external server or an MCP integration to, give the feedback. So that is check style. Then moving on. So there could be some runtime errors, like resource leak, typecasting, concurrency problems. So that's where this Spotbugs comes handy. It basically tries to catch. You can define rules, and there are a lot of built-in rules to catch these kind of issues. So that's the second static analysis tool for you. And then the architectural violation. I'll talk about a case where I have a layered architecture. I've got a Spring Boot, I have an API. So essentially you have a controller layer, you have a service layer, you have a DAO layer. Now, when the project starts, it's all clean. We are following everything nicely. And then within 1.5 to 2 years, pressures of P1, enhancements, XYZ comes up. So as a team, we basically, and then team members leave, they join. So essentially the layers which we want to maintain, those lines are blurred eventually in the long run. And that's where this arc unit comes into play, where you can essentially write your JUnits, which can, enforce these rules, and you can run it as JUnits. So it validates the layer separation, prevents circular dependencies. It also has a very nice feature, like if you want in few service classes @transactional to be there, some annotation which you want your classes to mandatorily have that. So that can also be verified using ArcUnit. So now finally, when we go ahead and talk about this, I've just made it as a table, but in an actual agents.md, I would not be, wasting the space for this table and all. I'll show, how are we going to integrate, but end of the day, what you have to specify in your agents.md in steps of doneness, that my criteria of doneness is go ahead and run the build against this check styles, pod bug, ArcUnit, and essentially that's what happens. So agents will, so step 1 will be agent will read your agents.md file, it will generate the code. Now I have written, you have to do mvn verify, find the violations, fix it, and then only, keep on retrying. So that's our whole feedback loop, which should basically give you clean and code which, follows all the standards. So the key benefits which we have of this particular process is, number one, you're not tied to one single coding agent. So if you have written your standards in agents.md, you can swap across the agents. Few callouts. Claude doesn't give you out of the box support for agents.md. There are 2 workarounds for it. Either you use, so there are 2 ways of using coding agents. One is you go directly to the vendor, you use its specific coding agent. Like I go to Claude, I take its subscription, I use the Claude agent. Or I use, the wrapper, I would say wrapper of coding agents, something like Copilot, where, or Ideas AI Assistant. So basically it gives you a shell, you decide your model, you choose your model, and it will go ahead and let you, choose against the model. So rather than I going to each vendor individually and paying for it, I basically go to GitHub or AI Assistant, and I can, choose my different models of different vendors. So essentially, now coming back to the Claude workaround, either you use something like interface of the coding agent, or in your Claude.md file, you give a reference to agents.md that you have to explicitly do it, and that's how it will work for Claude. So just a call out for everybody. So, and then other than the agent independence, you get a better confidence of your, once your build is running, is green, then you know that at least those issues have already been, filtered out. And then, and at no point of time, we should say that no human intervention is needed. So this is the technical part of it, but as a human reviewer, I should focus on the functional aspect rather than remembering the tons of rules of what good code looks like, right? So at no point of time, we should assume that, just finish it and, ship it to production. A human oversight is definitely needed from the functional correctness perspective. Okay, so end of the day, agents, there are so many changes which are going on. We have new coding agents coming up, models are improvising. But end of the day, what was good quality code 5 or 10 years or 15 years back remains good, even if written by you or the agent. And that's where it is very essential that you define your standards early on. Okay. Now, I'll just give a brief, roadmap of how the demo would go like. I'll first show a code or a project which has no integration, no agents.md file, no static tool analysis. I'll show the prompt which I had used to generate the code. And then I'll walk through what did the coding agent generated. And then I'll also show in the build what were the issues. And then we'll move on to a project which has static tool analysis integrated and agents.md integrated. And then we'll go ahead and generate the code and see what's the difference in the quality of the code. So let me. Okay, so now talking about a project which is, which doesn't have any agents.md file. So this doesn't have any agents.md file. When I had generated the code, it didn't have any static tool analysis as well. Now I'll first show the prompt which I had used. So I basically prompted the coding agent. So just for everybody's awareness, this is IDEA's AI chat. You can think of it like a co-pilot version of IDEA. So basically, I prompted, create a Spring Boot project using these dependencies. Okay, and the coding agent which I had used was Juni. It is something which is created by IDEA. And then it went ahead, created the code. That is all we see. Now I'll just walk through, how the code looks like. So not a bad code, I would say. It has generated the methods correctly. But if you see, there is no documentation. And also in Spring Boot, there is something called global exception handler. So rather than every place handling the exceptions individually, the correct way is, define your global exception handler, handle your exceptions over there, right? So if you see the code which got generated, it doesn't have a global exception handler, no documentation in place. I didn't tell the coding agent that these are my standards, so obviously formatting, naming, nothing is followed, right? And that's where, then later on, just to see how much violations I got. Now it is always a post step that, okay, now I remember I have to now fix this standard. So let me go ahead and see. Then the step 2 was, after I generated the code, I'll go ahead and run the build. So post the generation of the code, now I have integrated my violations, and these are the violations which have come. So one observation which I found is, even if you don't put your agents.md file, if you integrate your static tool analysis and then also you generate the code, the coding agent is smart enough to scan your project. It sees, okay, the person has check style, spot bugs, ArcUnit integrated. Let me generate the code as per that, right? So why I did this before? Because I wanted to show, if you do not have anything integrated, how will the coding agent know what it needs to be followed? So if you want to go ahead and get the code as per your standards, have the static tool analysis generated, and even if you do not mention it, the coding agent will go ahead and scan it for you and generate the code for you. Now we will move to the second part of it. That's that is the part where we talk about, so we have now a hierarchical structure. It has agents.md. It has, the integration in pom.xml for all the static tool analysis, check style, spot bug, and ArcUnit as well. Now I'll simply go ahead. Let me close everything. Okay, now this is a GitHub Copilot chat window. Okay, I'll go ahead and first, so for people who are not aware about this, so this is a GitHub Copilot chat window, and here if you see, you have you can select various mode. Ask is, it will just generate the code for you. It won't go ahead and do the changes for you. Edit is deprecated. Agent is what I'm talking about, where I will let the agent go ahead and do the changes for me. So I will basically say generate so what essentially what I have asked it. So the first thing, if you see, it is reading the agents.md, and it is reading all the agents.md. Because why it is reading all the agents.md? Because my change requires across the layer changes, right? So if you see, it first read agents.md. Now it is creating a plan. So open root agents.md, global ruled, these reopen. So basically it is reading all these child ones as well. Then it is going through all the rules I have specified. And then it goes ahead. And just a call out, right, for the demo purpose, maybe I have gone a little too descriptive, but in actual agents.md, you can keep your descriptions short as well. And then, so, I mean, one point which I would like to call out is, even if you have not put your agents.md, it goes ahead and scans all your whole project, right? So even if you do not have agents.md and if you have a static tool analysis integrated, the agent will, take that into consideration. So now it is generating all the classes. Okay, it's just summarizing, so I'll stop it in between. And then we can go ahead and see, the code which got generated. So it has clear documentation in place, and then we have exceptions. So if you remember the old use case, it didn't have these kind of exceptions. You have your global exception handler as well, because I had clearly said, for in the agents.md, go ahead and generate it. So the trick is, I won't say take one bulky agents.md file, experiment and see what agents.md by default generates. Don't put those rules in your agents.md file. That's the way to keep it light and ensures low token usage. And then, so I'll just walk through, what all do we have. Book services, IMPL. So it has, taken care of this. Now, I will now switch to, so this was Copilot. Now I will switch to AI Assistant, which you can see is the IDEA version of Copilot. I'll go to layout. So if I select now, again, just for everybody's reference, this here you can choose whatever coding agent you want. Juni is the IDEA one, Claude, Codex. Okay, so I'm using the AI Assistance Pro version. And if I have selected auto, it means it will go ahead and do the code changes for me. Let me close this. So on the same code, now I'm asking, now if you see, it is also reading the agents.md, right? So I didn't change my standard even if I switched my coding agent, right? So it is also going ahead and doing, number one, it first scans what is existing, and then accordingly it will go ahead and do the changes for the API, which I talked about. So, these are, the two agents which I have displayed, but if you go to agents.md, there are other coding agents which out of the box support agents.md. It is giving a very good integration with both IDEA and VS Code. So both support agents.md and you would not face any challenge. One call out is IDEA's latest version supports agents.md. The older versions do not support. So when you go ahead and try, make sure that you have the latest agents.md defined. And so it is going ahead and generating. So if I go ahead and look at the plan, still doing. And one thing to call out is it is also running MEN verify, right? So the feedback which I was talking about is taken care by this MEN verify, that if there are violations, it goes ahead and takes care of them. But what I have also observed is if you have your static tools analysis already integrated, most of the times, I'm not saying 100% of the times, most of the times the issues are already taken care. So I think that was it. Now coming back to one thing which, so in agents.md, you can find the coding agents which are giving the support for it. So feel free to, go ahead. I have added those references. So in short, you could see the marked difference between, without any integration, without any agents.md static tools, what was the code? It was not incorrect, I would say, but you could see a marked difference in the quality when you made a you were more aware and you made it very clear what exactly do you want. So just a quick summary. What is agents.md is a cross-agent compatible markdown file. Feel free, you can define it, anything which you think is could be helpful. Clear call out, don't overburden, don't use the one generated by the coding agent. Use something, so first without agents.md, go ahead and generate, see what is missing, start putting one by one. Don't take any, like I will be sharing the GitHub repo for my references, but honest opinion, go ahead, try experimenting. There has been so much change in the last 6 months. Like what coding agent was not able to do in November, December is able to do it like right now. So there is such a stark difference. So just be always on the lookout whether, what doesn't work, that only you should put over here. Check style, coding style, the patterns which you would like to enforce, runtime security bugs, and arc unit. I think I didn't show the code. Just a minute. So without any code generation, it would give, because I had empty folders. So I'll just uncomment you and try to show how does it, it look like. So as you can see, it's in the test folder. So it will run as a JUnit class, and then what all you should define, right? What are your layers, and then anything specific to the base package. Basically, all it does is it's not going to impact your performance. it is going to take care of your architecture rules, which you want to go ahead and follow it for your cleanliness of the project. And so, if one thing which I would like to go ahead and recommend is, I think more than prompting, I think we should be more focused on how do I define my standard across the project, and then how do I pass that context to the project, and second, how do I measure it, which will give you enough confidence that whatever has been done is as per the standards. At no point of time, don't assume that this doesn't need human intervention, because after so much uses, even if it's 100 out of 100, maybe in 5 or 10 instances, you will see that it hallucinates. So it is very essential that there should be a human oversight, but the human oversight should be for functional part, and I think, yeah. And this is the so the GitHub link has all the documentation for creation of the sample project. It also has the Agents.md files, both of the parent and the subdirectories. And you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or on mail, and feel free to go ahead and try it out. And the final reference, and thank you at 5 p.m. after such a long day, being so patient listener.
Can you put in the contact slide?
Okay. So your question is, the use case which I showed was project specific, but across the organization and across the projects, the rules remain the same. How do you make sure that that it is implemented across the projects? So I think there are two ways. One is still people can go ahead and modify it. One use case which we tried was, we put the Agents.md at a GitHub location. And then whenever a new project comes up, we make sure that in the scaffolding, we go ahead, fetch that file, and we go ahead and use it. But the call out over there is anybody can go ahead and modify Agents.md file. You cannot essentially go ahead and stop the user from modifying the Agents.md. So I would say at the GitHub level, you can go ahead, at the organization level, I think you can go ahead and in your coding agent, you can go ahead and set that up. But will it work across the agent is something which I'm not sure of. But you can do it for a per coding agent, but not across the coding agent. So I don't have the answer right now for and that's a very genuine concern, but maybe I'll get back to you on that part. So your question is, should we have an Agents.md in the test folder? What I have done is, in the controller itself, I have added a test section for my controller. So because normally what I had was, in my pom.xml, I have a code coverage carbuncula integrated. So when the coding agent generates the code, I have written an instruction in steps of doneness, go ahead and generate the test for it. So if you have set that expectation with the coding agent that your code should be generated along with the test, then make your Agents.md for that service layer have the test rules. But if you want that as a separate step, then separate it out. But it essentially depends what you expect from your coding agent. If code generation and test is something which you expect, then keep it in your layered specific Agents.md file. His question is Agents.md IDE specific or idea specific? So VS Code, IDEA, and a lot of coding, and even CLIs also support. In fact, Claude doesn't support out of the box in the IDE or through its chat, but its CLI version, as per documentation, they support it. So the question is, with Agents.md being used, do you see even humans reading Agents.md? Now, there is there is a fine line. Agents.md, when you will track your token usage, right? README, you can have the luxury of, going very descriptive. But agents.md should not be the place where you define or dump all the standards. Why? Because as a developer, I have been asked to do 50 things. The coding agent, for them, 20 things are by default, or 30 or 50% is already, they will do out of the box, right? So that's where, you should have separation, that agents.md, keep it crisp. The focus is for agents. If you want to use for developer, then you might be missing something which are out of the box coming from the coding agent, and you should not specify in your MD file.
Does this make sense?
Yes. So one thing to call out is this agents.md also lives across your chat sessions. It doesn't go away even if you close it, right? So one call out. And there is something called a concept which I think new coding, like now coding agents have introduced, like memory. Relatively new concept, but if you want the coding agent to remember few things, you can basically add it to memory, right? It's a very relative new feature, but I think this is something which I hope might be helpful of what you're looking at, that maybe I want this to always remember XYZ things. And then how, I'll just give an example of Copilot, right? So they have a defined days in which they refresh that memory, because if you keep something in memory and, it might go stale. So I think memory is something which you should look at, which is a new concept. Honestly, I have not used across the agent the memory. Obviously you can have MD files, save your, whatever you have done, you define it in your MD file, and it acts as a reference across the agent, like if you're referring to the MD file. But if you're talking about sharing the memory itself across the coding agent, that I'm not aware. What I have seen is, suppose I do my work and I basically then like for example, tell coding agent 1, can you make sure document whatever we have done so far to the latest code in an MD file? And then I switch to the other one and give that as a reference. That is what I have used, not like switching the memory of one coding agent to the other.
I was talking about that.
Okay.
Do you find it effective?
Yes, because, and you have to take it iteratively, right? Because I might be doing 10 things. So while the coding agent 1 might know, for the coding agent 2 to know, you have to break it down your steps and be very clear, that so that context is not lost in that summarization. But I find it helpful. Okay, if no other questions, thank you.